can be expensive, that it can be time-consuming, and there are some other issues. But I think the big issue for a lot of people is, how do I get my arms around this? How do I begin the process of formulating strategies that are appropriate for my community? And that's very important because as you know, blight varies. The causes of blight varies from county to county, from municipality to municipality, and so you need a very customized strategy for effectively addressing blight in your community or your county. This 5-step fast-track blight plan is a systematic, proven, and inexpensive process for municipalities and counties that want to develop a comprehensive, emphasis on the word comprehensive, strategy to address blight. And as I mentioned, this is a publication that will be released next month. Funding for the preparation and printing of this publication has been provided by the Benedum Foundation, and we appreciate their financial support. While limited hard copies will be available, the publication can be downloaded from the Pennsylvania Blight Library, but that will not be the case for a couple weeks. In other words, they're in the process of getting this uploaded to the Blight Library. So if you try to access it today, you won't be able to get there. In a couple of weeks, it should be there. And I'm sure Val will send out an email to everyone letting you know when it is available. But as I said, the misconceptions are that this is a time-consuming, lengthy process, that it can be expensive, that it can be complicated and overwhelming. And so those are some of the impediments. But to counter the misperceptions, the process, this 5-step process that I'm going to discuss with you today, is relatively quick. It takes about 4 months. Can be completed by staff or volunteers as a way of saving money, or you could hire a consultant. It is a proven strategy that lays out a logical, step-by-step procedure for blight planning. And the thing it does more than anything else is develop consensus among and between various stakeholders on how to address the issue of blight in your jurisdiction. What are the causes of blight? What is the extent of the blight? And then what are the most appropriate strategies for addressing blight? As I've mentioned, this has been utilized in 3 counties in Pennsylvania, Northumberland, Clearfield, and McKean County. And before I wrap up today, I'll share with you some of the results to date in those counties where this blight strategy has been helpful in providing direction and focus that has allowed these 3 counties to undertake some very interesting initiatives related to blight. The target audience for the population, and arguably the target audience for the blight strategy, are elected officials at the county and municipal level, appointed public officials from a variety of public agencies, nonprofit organizations, and business leaders. And again, that's the target of the publication, but you'll see as I go through this 5-step process that these are also stakeholders. There are other stakeholders in this process, of course, but the target audience for the publication is very much the audience that needs to be included in this process of developing a comprehensive blight strategy. So real quickly, here is the 5-step process. The first step is to gain consensus for developing a comprehensive blighted property strategy. The second is to assess the nature and extent of the blight. The third is to convene a blight task force. Step 4, engage municipal officials. Step 5, identify priority action steps and implement. And what we'll do is go through each one of these steps. And in conjunction with that, what I will do is talk about key components in order for that particular step to be accomplished well. There are some key components. The first step, gaining consensus for developing a comprehensive blighted property strategy. There are 3 components of that: engagement of political leadership, commitment of staff resources, and engagement of key stakeholders. So for many of you, you are certainly interested, and certainly obvious because of your participation in this call today, that you are interested in this subject. But it isn't always a slam dunk, and maybe some of you have found this, that in dealing with other officials, that there may not be consensus, that there needs to be a comprehensive blight strategy. For whatever reason, you may be getting pushback. Could be a variety of reasons that you're getting pushback, but those reasons could range from cost, could range from a question of where this process may end up, any variety of issues. But the point is, you need to begin the process of laying the groundwork so that there is consensus to form this task force. And the idea at the end of the road is that you have consensus on strategies. But this first key, the engagement of political leadership, in the 3 counties where this has been utilized, that political leadership has been the county commissioners. And the county commissioners in the counties of McKean and Clearfield and Northumberland appointed the members of the Blight Task Force. So it's just obvious that in the case of a county undertaking this process, there's a need for the county commissioners to be on board. There's another reason that you want the county on board, and that is because, as you know, counties and municipalities control access to funding, whether it's applications for state funds or use of community development block grant funds to address blighted properties, whatever, but they have financial resources that are available that they control and can make available for the purpose of addressing the blight problem. The second key to this step 1 of gaining consensus is the commitment of staff resources. Bottom line, there needs to be a lead organization in the jurisdiction, whether that jurisdiction is a county or a municipality. In the case of McKean County, for example, the lead organization was the Redevelopment and Housing Authorities of McKean County. In Clearfield, it was the Clearfield County Planning Commission. In Northumberland, it was the Northumberland County Housing Authority. But you need a lead organization that will set up the meeting with the political leadership, whether that leadership is at the county level or municipal level. If the blight strategy is going to be undertaken at a municipal level, obviously you want to have meetings with municipal officials, both elected and appointed. And in the case of county, the county commissioners and other key officials at the county level are important to include in this process, including the planning commission and including the chief clerk of the county or the county administrator. So there are others that should be included in this process as well at the county level. If the political leadership provides the green light, in other words, after you have that meeting and you hear from the county commissioners or the municipal officials that they would want this process to proceed, then the staff, whatever organization is the lead organization, would engage a facilitator to lead the process, and you'll see the process unfold in the next couple minutes. Conducting the blighted property assessment, I'll be talking about that more in a few minutes, and handling the task force administrative responsibilities, and I'll talk about those as well. Finally, the engagement of key stakeholders. Obviously, this is important because these stakeholders should be included as members of the Blight Task Force, whether it's at a county or municipal level. These are folks that would have the insight, the capacity, or the resources to address the blighted property problem. They could be residents, business organizations, organizations tasked with addressing blight, or organizations such as hospitals and colleges that own properties in or near neighborhoods with blighted properties. And finally, based on my experience and the experience of others, you certainly want to include people from the County Tax Claim Bureau, because those folks know about the tax delinquent properties, particularly those on the county repository list and those that are up for judicial sale. And obviously you want to also include people from municipal and county planning organizations. These are people, again, to include on the task force. So once the task force has been composed, appointed by whatever elected body you're going to undertake essentially the study area. What is the study area for this? Is it municipal or is it county? Once that task force has been appointed, the one thing you want to do before you convene the task force as the lead organization, you want to essentially assess the nature and extent of blight, or you want to at least put that process in motion. And you do that essentially by developing a survey, and that survey is administered to municipalities to obtain certain data. And that data is essentially relates to the nature and extent of blighted properties in their community. And also that survey has them talk a little bit about what the current level of effort is on their part in addressing blighted properties. So you essentially have a baseline. You have the data on blighted properties, and you also have some information on what that level of effort is. It is important to develop a consistent definition of blight to determine the number of blighted properties. And in the publication, there is a definition of the urban redevelopment law. And one of the things I encourage jurisdictions to do is use that as your definition of blight, because the definition of blight is very subjective. In my travels, again, I've seen municipal officials talk about blight in different ways that tells me they're really not on the same page in terms of what a blighted property is. And that's important, and the reason I think there needs to be a, if you will, standard definition, and the reason that that standard definition should be the definition under state law, specifically the urban redevelopment laws, because a lot of the funding programs that jurisdictions will try to access are state funding programs. So to the extent the properties meet that state definition of blight, that begins to sync up with the mission of organizations like the Pennsylvania Department of Community and Economic Development in addressing blighted properties. The other reason that you want this survey information as a foundation for the work of the Blight Task Force is that you really want to make decisions on strategies, what will be the most effective strategies in that jurisdiction. You want to make decisions based on data, not anecdotes. And if this is going to be an effective, comprehensive blight strategy, you want to have all of the information that you can possibly get before the task force meets and begins formulating strategies. There is a sample survey in the publication. Again, this is the survey that you would administer to municipalities where they would talk about blighted properties, give you some information on those blighted properties. That information would include whether the structure is vacant or occupied. If it's occupied, is it owner or renter occupied? How long has the property been blighted? What's the address of the property owner? Is it owned by an absentee owner? What's the cause of the blight? And what tools are currently in place to enforce property maintenance codes? And again, that's where you get at what is the municipality doing at this point to deal with blighted properties? Do they have a property maintenance code? Are they enforcing that property maintenance code? And as part of that survey instrument, there is essentially a paraphrasing of the state definition of blight under the urban redevelopment law. So in answering this survey as to what properties are blighted, the municipal officials are referenced back to that state definition of blight, which is actually a paraphrasing of that is included in the survey instrument. To be honest, to maximize the survey return, because municipal officials are busy and some of them are part-time, it's necessary for the lead organization, whatever organization is spearheading the completion of this comprehensive blight strategy, it's probably going to be necessary for that organization to follow up with municipalities a couple weeks after it's sent, just to make sure you get the best return possible. You will not get 100% return from municipalities unless your situation is exceptional. But I think you're trying to get a return of 60, maybe 70%, which frankly gives you a lot more information about the nature and extent of blight and the level of the municipal effort than you had before. And that's the information you need to make good decisions about what strategies will effectively address blight. Task force objectives, and this is the third step, convene the Blight Task Force. So we've been talking really, the first two steps are kind of the precursor steps to actually the task force meetings. And the task force objectives, one of the things that you want this task force to accomplish is to evaluate the blight survey data. You want them to craft a vision. When I've led this process in a couple jurisdictions, the question that I asked in trying to get the group to think about a vision is how will attacking blight yield dividends and what will my community look like? And then the third objective of the task force is to determine the most effective strategies considering the nature and extent of the problem. the political constraints, and the capacity to address the problem. So we're going to drill now into the details of this Blight Task Force, how often it meets, what will be discussed at each of the meetings. The task force will meet 4 times, with meetings being about 1 month apart. Now let me say this. This process certainly can be altered to suit your situation. There may be the feeling that you need more time between the task force meetings, and that's fine. But I'm just saying in the jurisdictions that this has been utilized, the Keene, Clearfield, and Northumberland, those meetings have been about a month apart. And the nice thing about that is, at the end of that 4-month period, at the end of that last Blight Task Force period, the strategy is in place. And you can certainly extend this process, but in extending the time between meetings, you're extending the process. And I know there's a feeling on the part of some that they don't want people to lose interest in this process, so we've been able to conclude this process in each of these 3 municipalities in about 120 days. One of the questions that you want to be able to answer is, what are the responsibilities of the task force members? They should be clearly stated in the appointment letter they receive from the appointing body, whether that's the county commissioners or a municipality. But the responsibilities of the task force members would be to attend all meetings, actively participate in all meetings of the task force, and complete background readings on the tools to address blight. We'll talk about those in a minute. The suggested agendas for each of the 4 meetings are actually in the publication. So you can see what is to be discussed at each of these 4 meetings. And I'll start to get into that now with the first meeting. The first meeting, and again, at the first meeting you have members of the task force. Some of the items that you would cover at the first meeting would be discussing the survey results. This is the Blight survey results of the municipalities. Reaching consensus on the nature and extent of the blighted property problem. The questions that you want to ask the task force after they've had the opportunity to review those survey results. And by the way, they should get those a couple weeks in advance of the meeting. So the lead organization is going to have to compile those results and send them out to the task force members in advance of the meeting. But the questions that would be posed to the task force would be, what do the survey results tell us about the extent of the problem? What light does the survey shed on possible causes of blighted property? And how would you describe the municipal effort to address the blight? Is the municipality doing a good job? Are they doing a so-so job? That's helpful because we're not criticizing municipalities in this process, but just trying to figure out what their capacity is to address blight, because that could be one of the areas that needs to be addressed in the blight strategy, is to increase the capacity of municipalities by steering additional resources to municipalities so that they can do a better job. So we're not being critical of municipalities, we're not critiquing their effort as much as trying to get a realistic assessment of what their capacity is to deal with this problem. Also at the first meeting, there really is a need to discuss some guiding principles that will guide the task force in reaching consensus on the strategies to address blight. And these guidelines are important because they really serve as a set of ground rules for future discussion. And in the publication, I've included a sample of guiding principles from Clearfield County, so you can see some of the guiding principles that were generated by the task force at that first meeting to guide their discussions going forward. And to the extent there were differences of opinion, and no doubt you will have differences of opinion, you should have differences of opinion among and between the members of the task force, sometimes those guiding principles can help reach a resolution, can help the task force get on common ground. The other thing you want to do in this first meeting is, as I've previously suggested, talk a little bit about the vision. How would my community be better if blight was less prevalent? You want people to talk about that. You want them to be able to visualize if this blight strategy is implemented, and it's implemented well, then what will my community look like, so that they can visualize the results. Still, talking about this first meeting, and as you can tell, this first meeting is a very important meeting. A lot of boxes will need to be checked off in terms of things you want to accomplish. You want to discuss quantifiable outcomes that the Blight Task Force hopes to achieve. These could be the number, again, emphasis on the word quantifiable, a number of properties that you'd like to demolish in the next 3 to 5 years, number of blighted properties you'd like to demolish or rehabilitate, and looking maybe further out, an increase to what extent, what is your goal in terms of seeing an increase in property values in that particular neighborhood as a result of blighted properties being eliminated. And also the one thing you can track that is a great outcome is to what extent have municipal costs been reduced as a result of a reduction in blighted properties, because there are less police calls to those properties, perhaps less fire calls to those properties. Even the code enforcement effort with regard to blighted properties, at least on a per property basis, it's not as extensive because you've dealt with these blighted properties. They're still spending a lot of time on code enforcement, don't get me wrong, but because you have taken care of the worst problems, either through demolishing or rehabilitating them, there's a savings within the code enforcement department in terms of time and effort with regard to those most blighted properties. The other thing I like to do with this first meeting is also share a few tools from the Blight to Bright publication. I think all of you are familiar with that publication. Came out a couple of years ago, essentially a compendium of strategies to address blighted properties. And it's important that you share some of those strategies with the task force even at the first meeting. That isn't to say that the strategies you're going to share are appropriate, because you don't know that yet for that jurisdiction. But I'd like to share some strategies simply to give task force members an idea that there is hope for dealing with these problems. A lot of the task force members don't have a lot of background, specific background on the tools to address blight. So when they hear about something like Act 90, which allows you to deny permits under certain circumstances to owners of properties that are tax delinquent, out of compliance with codes, when they hear about Act 90, when they hear about the tool of conservatorship, these are typically two tools I do share with them at this first meeting, just to start the educational process, that they really are encouraged because they didn't realize that those tools existed. And the thing that's encouraging is, while this discussion that would have occurred prior to this is about the nature and extent of the blighted properties, and there's the feeling maybe that it's an overwhelming problem at that point because of this survey data, when you introduce some solutions, some tools that are available to them that maybe they hadn't thought about previously, there's the feeling that, yes, we can do this. We can attack this blighted property problem, even though it may be pretty extensive. We can do this because we do have a few tools at our disposal. So that's the first meeting, and then you move into the second meeting. But between the first and second meeting, there's a reading assignment for the task force members. And it's no small reading assignment. Those of you that have read the Blight to Bright publication, it is a very comprehensive compendium. And that's what the task force members need to do between that first and second meetings, read through that, become more familiar with different tools to address blight, because at some point, and that point occurs during the second meeting, they're going to be asked to prioritize and select strategies that are most appropriate, would be most effective for their jurisdiction, whether it's a county or a municipality. So you'd want, at a minimum, if you can't get hard copies of Blight to Bright, you'd want to make them aware of the link. Here's the link for the Blight to Bright publication, and really tell the task force members that in order to do a good job at the second meeting, they've really got to go through that now. They don't have to memorize it. We all know that this can get pretty complicated, the use of some of these tools, but generally what they're being asked to do is become familiar with some of these tools. The main purpose of the second meeting is to answer questions that members of the task force have about the tools. So obviously it's important they read the publication. What the facilitator does in advance of that second meeting is basically for each of the tools in that Blight to Bright publication, each tool gets listed on an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper, a summary of it. And the facilitator would want to group the tools into 3 categories. This is a suggestion, but you may have different categories or more categories, but in the 3 counties where this has been utilized, it's been 3 categories: prevention, remediation, and redevelopment. So each of the tools that relate to prevention that appear in the Blight to Bright publication, you would want to put those in a column under prevention. Each of the tools that relate to remediation, they go under a column remediation. Each of the tools that go under redevelopment, example of redevelopment would be the use of LRDA or the residential tax abatement program, just an example of a redevelopment strategy. So you have essentially in 3 columns, and under each column you have numerous strategies, summaries, listed on 8.5 by 11 pieces of paper. Before people decide which strategies are the best, the facilitator would want to do a quick PowerPoint presentation just to go through these tools, a summary of each tool. And it kind of reinforces essentially what people have read and gives people on the task force the opportunity to ask questions. Once that process is completed, and certainly you get a lot of questions coming out of that presentation, as you should, then each person in the group, each task force member, is given 7 sticky notes. You could vary the number, but 7 is the number that's been used in the 3 counties. And essentially, they are their votes that they use to select the most appropriate, the most effective strategies for dealing with blight in their community. And the question that would be posed is based on your understanding of the strategies. What will be most effective in addressing blight in this county or municipality? And the members of the task force basically select a strategy that they think would be effective by putting that sticky note right on that 8.5 by 11 piece of paper on which that strategy is written. And the beauty of this process is that by the end of that meeting, you begin to see consensus about certain strategies that would be effective. Because the results of the voting is visible to all. You can see which strategies got 10, 11, 12, 13 votes by simply counting up the number of sticky notes. You can see which had maybe 6, 7, or 8, which of the strategies only had 1 or 2. And because, as I said, the results of the voting is visible, the top-tier strategies usually end up with 5 or 6 top-tier strategies that have 10, 11, 12, 13 votes, if you will. And then you have a middle-tier strategy, and you usually have 5 or 6 of those. And then you have what I call lower tier that only got a couple votes. The ones that you want to highlight in the comprehensive blight report, and we'll talk about that in a minute, are the top tier and the middle tier strategies, because clearly the lower tier strategies did not get a sufficient number of votes in order to be, there's no consensus that those are good strategies, so they should not be included in the blight strategy report, which we'll talk about in a minute. One of the questions that I am asked is, can I use my votes and actually place 2 votes on one particular strategy, or even 3 votes on one particular strategy? And the answer to that is, yeah, generally I limit it to 2, no more than 2 out of the 7 votes they can put on one particular strategy. But if they do feel strong enough that that strategy, and essentially what we're doing is it's a weighting process, if you will, it's how they're weighting their votes. If they feel a strategy that is up there on the wall is that much that much more effective than others, then they would be able to allow, they would be allowed to put 2 of their sticky notes on there. Now you could allow them to put 3. That's up to you. But the point is, you don't want them, you don't want to allow them to put all 7 on one particular strategy because that skews the results. In any event, once you see on the wall essentially each of the strategies, how many votes they got, you want to record that before you leave that meeting, and then you get into the third meeting. And between the second and third meeting, a draft report is prepared. This is the draft Blight strategy report. It can be written by an individual or a paid consultant or by a team of volunteers. It should include an introduction. It should include the survey data. It should include discussion of the impact. What is the impact of Blight on the community currently? It should include a section called desired outcomes. Then you get into priority strategies that emerge from the task force deliberations, and each one of those strategies gets discussed in detail. And then finally, possible next steps. At that point, again, the task force members would have been sent the draft report at least a week in advance of this third meeting. You would want to open it up for discussion and allow members of the task force to give you feedback on the report. And they may see something that doesn't look right. They may, it may just be very minor editing. It depends on, essentially the task force in terms of the extent to which they want to do substantial editing on the report, and they may find the report is perfectly fine the way it is, and they may want some changes. But essentially what you're doing in that third meeting is giving the task force members the opportunity to edit that draft report, which has, again, been prepared by an individual or a team of volunteers, so that when that report gets sent out to municipal officials, which is the next meeting, you do have a consensus among and between task force members about what the most effective strategies are. The fourth meeting, from my standpoint, is where the rubber meets the road, because that meeting is really the culmination of the work of the Blight Task Force. Municipal officials are invited, all municipal officials are invited to that fourth meeting. I should say every municipality is invited to send 1 or more representatives to that fourth meeting. And typically you will have municipal managers, code enforcement officials, could be elected officials as well, attending that meeting. And what you're trying to do with this fourth meeting is draw them into what the task force has learned and what the task force believes are the most effective strategies. The draft Blight task force, again, is shared with the municipal officials, so part of the fourth meeting is devoted to reviewing the priority strategies, those strategies that rose to the top. They're either the top tier strategies or the middle tier strategies that are referenced in the report. You want to give municipal officials an opportunity to ask questions about the report. But here's the nice thing about this meeting. Not only are you engaging municipal officials, but if one of the recommendations in the report, just to use as an example, is to enact a ticketing ordinance, to ticket for code violations, rather than starting that process with a code citation that would go through the district justice process. And a lot of jurisdictions like the ticketing process because it allows them to resolve the code issue more quickly and at less expense without going through the formal code compliance process that might end up before a district justice. And by the way, if you can't resolve it at the ticketing level, then you still need to go through that process. But 95% of the code issues, seem to be able to get resolved through the ticketing process based on my discussions with municipal officials. If that's one of the recommendations, that municipalities should be encouraged to implement or adopt a ticketing ordinance, then what you can have at this meeting, what you should have at this meeting, is a draft ticketing ordinance. And so at the meetings that I've been involved with, this fourth meeting, if that's a recommendation, then there's a draft ordinance that they can pick up that can be handed out to them that they could enact, or a sample ordinance that they could enact to implement ticketing. If one of the recommendations is to implement the provisions of Act 90, then there should be a sample ordinance that would allow the municipal officials to implement or adopt Act 90. And there are other examples. There's something called the Fire Insurance Escrow Proceeds law that allows municipalities to adopt an ordinance that essentially escrows a portion of the fire insurance proceeds. If that's one of the recommendations that comes out of this, then a sample ordinance can be made available to them at this meeting. So the municipal officials essentially are equipped with new ideas to address blighted properties, as well as draft documents to implement specific strategies. And I talked about the different sample ordinances. Another one that frequently comes up is landlord registration. That could be another sample ordinance that is made available if that is a priority strategy. But let me emphasize this before I go any further. The priority strategies, because this is a very much of a local process. If you took a look at the Blight strategy reports for McKean, you would see very different strategies in the McKean report compared to Clearfield and Northumberland. And that's the beauty of this process. This is not as we all know, this is not a one-size-fits-all process. There are certain strategies because of the nature of certain jurisdictions. It could be a political situation. It could be just the data is telling you that what is an issue in McKean County is not an issue in Clearfield County. Maybe absentee landlords are not as big an issue. Each of these reports is very different in terms of the substantive recommendations. And so this is a very customized approach for drafting a blight strategy, and it should be, because there are variations throughout the Commonwealth in terms of the nature and extent of blight and what solutions would be most effective in those circumstances. But before joining this fourth meeting, you'd want to talk about funding opportunities to acquire and demolish blighted properties, technical assistance to municipalities in strengthening ordinances to address blight, and exploring other initiatives such as a circuit rider code enforcement officer. These are some ideas that may come out of that report. Step 5 is the implementation. So you're not done. You've got this blight strategy, and one thing you don't want to have happen is to have it sit on a shelf. So step 5 would be, again, the implementation process. And to ensure that the recommendations of the task force are implemented, it's critical that what I call an action team be formed. The members of this team will consist of representatives of each organization that will have a role in implementing the plan. Action team tasks include developing a detailed action plan for each of the priority strategies in the Blight Task Force. What tasks are associated with implementing that strategy? What's the time frame for accomplishing those tasks? What's the lead organization that will be responsible for accomplishing those tasks? And then what are the resources needed? And a sample action plan is included in the publication, so you'll be able to see how this lays out. Essentially, the action team might be composed of 5, 6, 7 organizations that, again, have a role in addressing blight in that jurisdiction. I suggest they meet on a quarterly basis to review progress, to update the plan, to identify prominent blighted properties that are good opportunities for redevelopment and reuse. And related to that point, within the action team, I think there can be what I call a redevelopment team formed. And this redevelopment team could include certain members of the action team, but could also include other organizations, let's say economic development organizations, and possibly some nonprofit organizations that are involved in redeveloping properties. And the redevelopment team then is really, their goal is to look at properties that could be acquired and redeveloped, potential properties that could be acquired and redeveloped, And what the goal of the redevelopment team is to tee up the project for a private developer or perhaps a nonprofit developer or even a public entity by obtaining site control, completing preliminary environmental due diligence, and managing risks that can make the property difficult to develop. See, what you're doing is taking these strategies and beginning to move from concept to reality. How do we actually accomplish what we need to accomplish in the context of these strategies, and who's responsible for accomplishing it, and when will it be accomplished? Real quickly, before I end my presentation, I just wanted to share some results today. First, from Clearfield County. The county has received over $130,000 in FAIR funds through the Pennsylvania Housing Finance Agency for the demolition of blighted structures. The Moshannon Valley Council of Governments has provided leadership in encouraging 5 municipalities to adopt or update property maintenance codes. The city of Du Bois is considering the adoption of a rental housing licensing ordinance, and several communities are considering the enactment of a ticketing ordinance. And these results, you can trace them back directly to the strategies that are in Clearfield County's Blight Plan. So these have flowed out of that strategy. These have been initiatives that have been accomplished as a result of a focused effort to implement those strategies. Northumberland County, on the past 3 years, 37 blighted properties have been demolished and 2 have been rehabilitated. This is subsequent to the completion of their blight strategy. The Housing Authority has used the conservatorship tool to address 13 blighted properties, and over $1 million has been secured through a variety of funding sources to address blight in the county. And then finally, in McKean County, the McKean County Redevelopment Authority has established a blighted property review board. That was one of the strategies that was referenced in the Blight Strategy Report, and the Redevelopment and Housing Authority followed up on that and actually did establish a blighted property review board, which allows them to acquire vacant, blighted properties through eminent domain. The Redevelopment Authority has also organized a technical assistance program to assist communities in strengthening a variety of codes to address blight. And that program has consisted of working with municipalities to redraft ordinances or to draft new ordinances to address blight. And I think 5 communities were targeted by the Redevelopment and Housing Authority. These 5 communities came forward. There was an application process where municipalities were given the opportunity to come forward to express their interest in receiving this technical assistance. 5 of the municipalities did so. And so the work involved essentially working with those 5 municipalities to strengthen their ordinances or to adopt new ordinances to effectively address blight. Finally, the authority has used Act 137 funds and CDBG funds to demolish 4 blighted properties. So just to wrap up, blighted properties, as we all know, blighted properties, the effect of those properties on a community or their concern throughout the Commonwealth. And this 5-step fast-track blight plan approach has been used successfully, giving communities a focused approach for addressing blight going forward and putting them in a good position to compete for funds. This is a quick way of getting consensus. And I know from working throughout the Commonwealth that there's interest in dealing with this blight problem, and there's a desire to deal with it. What the question is, what strategies are most appropriate for our jurisdiction? How do we reach consensus on that? And then how do we marshal the resources to effectively address this problem? So this is a process that does build consensus about what needs to be done and can be accomplished quickly and at a modest cost. So I'll end with that. And Val, do you want to open the line for questions?
The conference has been unmuted.
Okay, I believe, do we have questions for Chris? just so comprehensive, Chris, that there are no questions.
Well,
Very
again, the
thorough
publication gives you a step-by-step process. This is a summary of it, but you'll actually see much more detailed information on how to conduct the meetings and more specific information on agendas for each meeting. But yes, was there a question?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I can.
Hey, this is Ed Geiger.
Hi, Ed.
Question. In the process, I know it is somewhat public in that you create the task force, but do you ever do a public meeting of, invite in anybody that wants to listen in and have comments about the plan?
I think the fourth meeting, which is the meeting with municipalities, I know in some of the jurisdictions that has been public. And I think you can make the argument it probably should be public because you do have municipal officials attending. But I'm sure in Clearfield that was a public meeting. And I think behind your question is the thought that at some point this needs to open up from a discussion of task force members and become essentially an opportunity for the public to share their thinking as well. And I think it's that fourth meeting that's the best opportunity.
Thanks.
Okay. I'm not hearing any other questions. Val, do we want to wrap up?
Okay, sure. Thank you so much, Chris. I will be sure to get this information out. And the publications that Chris was mentioning, we will have the e-books out in the next couple of weeks. And I do want to mention, and I will be sending the invite out again, but we have a land bank summit taking place May 11th and 12th in Latrobe, Pennsylvania. And we have a great program shaping up there. Chris will be talking about his publication as one of the panels on that Thursday morning. But we have a great agenda. We're kicking off late afternoon on that Wednesday with Winnie releasing her publication, the Land Bank Resource Guide, and that's the webinar I had mentioned earlier, and I will get those details out to you again as well. We have a great dinner program coming up that night. We have April Kopis, who will be talking about the success the Westmoreland County Land Bank had. And then we have a full day the next day on Thursday, starting bright and early. We have working group meetings that'll take place, followed again by Chris, talking more about the publication. There'll be learning labs from 3 different counties. Then we're going to have another workshop panel from established land banks so they could share some of their ideas for everyone. The lunch program, bringing in Cuyahoga County. Cheryl Stevens, she's one of the national experts there. They're going to share a lot of information there. And we're going to finish it with a walking tour of properties right near the college that have been blighted, and they've been totally rebuilt. So it's very exciting. So there is the link. We have a group rate for a hotel. All those details I will be sure to send out along with all this information.
Val, I did see a question that related to how this process might work in a municipal effort rather than a county effort. And again, I believe this is a process that can work at a municipal level rather than a county level. I think it looks different. The fourth meeting looks different. This is happening at a municipal level. I mean, you still appoint the Blight Task Force. You still look at data to determine the nature and extent of the problem in your municipality. You still go through the process of having the task force prioritize strategies. That fourth meeting, though, because you're working within a municipality, a municipal strategy, I think what you do in that fourth meeting is bring in more municipal officials than maybe had been represented on the task force to bring them into the discussion. And again, that fourth meeting could be a public meeting. So I think with the exception of the fourth meeting, this applies pretty much without much change to a municipal setting, and the fourth meeting is more a meeting of municipal officials around the table with the members of the task force. So I just wanted to address that question. And anything else, Val, before we sign off?
No, I think we're good. I thank you, Chris. And again, I will be sending out all the information regarding this presentation, the information for the webinar coming up next week, the Land Bank Summit information, and feel free to get in touch with me. I'll have my contact information on there too with any questions about any of these great events that we're doing.
Okay. Hope to see you all in Latrobe next month.
Okay. Thanks so much. Have a good weekend, everyone. Take care.
You too. Bye now.
Bye-bye.